Dragon Ball Lao Su is the god of destruction. Chapter 241-260. Chapter 241 Receive Power. Chapter 241 Receiving Power. Weiss, the god of destruction, called Weiss in after seeing the people of King Quan leaving. Thinking of the day he just came back. In fact, thanks to Weiss, he was able to find out that there was someone following him all the time. This guy, Weiss, loves beauty very much. He keeps a mirror with him. The god of destruction discovered this secret through the refraction of the mirror when he saw a different place next to his own shadow on the ground, but he didn't make a sound. And that person must be very strong. Otherwise he will follow the god of destruction all the way. The god of destruction cannot be unaware, nor can he blame the god of destruction, because King Quan is afraid of the god of destruction, so he sends the shadow to visit, so that he will not be caught. Find. After years of tacit understanding, the god of destruction gave Weiss a look, and Weiss read the meaning of it. Looking at the extra shadow, he didn't ask anything. Even the worried eyes were put down, as if the god of destruction just went for a walk and came back. Finally, wait until that person is gone. Weiss came in slowly, glanced around, and saw the god of destruction nodding to Weiss, and only then did he dare to speak. Sir, god of destruction, is that the person of the Quanwang? Weiss's eyes were full of sincere concern. Well, but I'm leaving now. I've been too tired to act in the past few days. The god of destruction nodded indifferently. Looking at the lazy waist of the god of destruction, Weiss stepped forward sensible and kicked the shoulder for the god of destruction, pressing his neck to relieve the god of destruction's fatigue. The god of destruction relaxed his body and took a deep breath of comfort. Weiss, do you remember, last time, a black ball entered my body? When Weiss heard the god of destruction mention the black ball, he stopped for a second, and then continued to squeeze it again. Remember, what's wrong? Weiss didn't know what the god of destruction meant, but he felt that Lord God of Destruction would not suddenly mention useless things, so he simply continued to listen. My coma this time has something to do with the black ball. The god of destruction said calmly, his eyes closed comfortably to enjoy. Who knew that Weiss heard the heavy hand, which hurt the god of destruction a little? The god of destruction froze, frowned, opened his eyes, and snorted in discomfort. Feeling the change in the god of destruction, Weiss hurriedly admitted his mistake, and focused on it again. While massaging, he asked about the god of destruction's coma. The god of destruction told Weiss all about the dream trial he had experienced in a coma, and the secret of the black ball that he learned from King Quan. He also told Weiss that the reason why King Quan summoned him was because of the black ball, and he also said that he had promised King Quan to look for the black ball. Weiss became more worried as he listened, only to know that King Quan did not believe it so easily, and sent people to watch. Weiss, don't worry, the black ball has disappeared, even I can't feel its existence, and King Quan can't find any trace of him. These days, I will practice hard and see the energy of the black ball. Is it as powerful as King Quan said? The god of destruction's soothing tone wanted to lessen Weiss's worries. Seeing that Weiss did not respond, and the movements of his subordinates became slower and slower, the god of destruction looked back at Weiss and found Weiss. His eyes were dull, and he didn't know what he was thinking. The god of destruction frightened Weiss, and when Weiss came back to his senses, he spoke again. If you frown like this, you don't know how many wrinkles you will grow. The god of destruction said lightly, but suddenly caught Weiss' weakness. Weiss hurriedly picked up the mirror to check, touched his face with his hand, and said something in his mouth. Don't say it, I feel that my skin is really not very good recently, and there are wrinkles at the corners of my eyes. The god of destruction couldn't help chuckling, and then ordered Weiss to be optimistic about the seventh universe these days. He must practice and cultivate well and receive the power of the black ball. The god of destruction locked himself in the room and arranged a layer of barrier outside the room. If someone approached within 100 meters, the god of destruction could sense it. Who knows if King Quan will send someone to inquire again, so it's always right to take precautions before they happen. After everything is arranged, the god of destruction can rest assured to cultivate. Concentrate on gathering energy and slowly gather your own energy, but the energy seems to have no end, and it has been condensing continuously. The light sphere is getting bigger and bigger, and the white light is getting stronger and stronger. At this time, the god of destruction was surrounded by intense dark energy, and the magnetic field was particularly strong. According to the formula that the black ball finally gave him, the god of destruction gradually controlled those huge energies and integrated them. As the hands continued to change, the formula became faster and faster, and the ball of light seemed to be alive in the hands of the god of destruction. Same. Finally, spread all the energy all over the body, and all the breaths will return to peace again. The god of destruction has received all the power and turned it into his own power, and the dark breath has also been hidden by him. He is afraid of causing disasters in the future. Restored to the beginning together, except that the god of destruction has a black ring on his hand. Chapter 242 Ring that popped up. Chapter 242 The ring that suddenly appeared. The god of destruction opened his black eyes after cultivating. Those eyes, at this time, appeared brighter and radiant because of the darkness. As if he had already sensed the energy in his body, the god of destruction hooked his lips in a good mood. This black ball is indeed a good thing. In fact, he didn't know that it was just a rarity of the strange power of the black ball. He can feel that his strength has made a qualitative leap, because before his own strength was one of the best in the god of destruction, so it is difficult to continue to break through, but this black ball has helped the god of destruction to break through layer by layer. Especially the self-care magic that I most want to learn. He took a deep breath and let it out again. The expression on his face has become relaxed. At this time, the god of destruction, because he received a huge amount of energy, was surrounded by a white light, which made him look radiant. The god of destruction sat up and picked up his father's sidearm, which was beside him. He narrowed his eyes lightly and concealed all his emotions. The moment the god of destruction picked it up, he saw that there was an additional ring on his hand. His stern eyebrows were deeply condensed together, and he looked at the ring with some doubts. The ring exudes a dark aura, which is somewhat similar to that of the black ball. Observing this ring, what's so special about it? He didn't remember before, he had such a ring, and he didn't know when he put it on, looking at it with blurred eyes. So with his other hand, carefully and constantly rubbing, he has fallen into infinite reverie. I determined the source of the ring in my mind for a long time, and finally racked my brains, but I couldn't come up with anything, so my finger had already put the ring on, and I wanted to pull it off. But the god of destruction didn't pull it out all of a sudden. He clearly felt that the ring was not so tight, so why couldn't he pull it out? He frowned slightly, and continued to exert force, but the ring seemed to have grown on his hand, and he couldn't pull it out. Simply, the god of destruction has other things to do, and I don't want to continue to entangle, so I focus on this little thing, thinking, when the time comes, he asks Weiss to put it on, it may also be worn when he is in a coma. The god of destruction took his father's sidearm, strode out, waved his hand, and the barrier set up outside the room disappeared. The god of destruction was breathing the fresh air, and there was a lot of wanton between his eyebrows and eyes. I don't know why, but his strength was probably improved, and now the god of destruction looked at everything so pleasing to the eye. Satisfied laughed. Weiss. The god of destruction called Weiss's name to the air. Weiss appeared very quickly, as if he had been waiting for the god of destruction. Lord God of Destruction, I'm here, what are your orders? Weiss respectfully looked at the god of destruction who had just cultivated. It was enough to just glance at it. He even kept staring at the god of destruction, as if he wanted to make a face of the god of destruction. Poke a hole in it. Master Destruction, did you secretly put on a mask behind my back? Why do you feel that your complexion is so much better and your temperament is different? Weiss is like a curious baby, surrounded by destruction. God continued to look around in circles. Although he was praised by others, the god of destruction couldn't stand the naked eyes of this. Fart, I have such a bitch like you. The god of destruction showed a trace of impatience in his eyes, staring at Weiss threateningly. There is a kind of meaning that if you talk nonsense again, I will tear your mouth to pieces. Whis received the expression that the god of destruction was going to eat people, and forcibly held back the rebuttal, turned his head sideways and flattened his mouth, but did not speak. By the way, what's the matter with the extra ring on my hand? The god of destruction stretched out his hand and showed the ring in the air, but this ring has no dark aura around it. At this moment, he was lying quietly on the hand of the god of destruction. It was no different from an ordinary ring, even a little ugly, because there was no luster on the ring, which was completely different from what the god of destruction saw just now. Weiss looked blankly at the ordinary black ring on the hand of the god of destruction, and said, "I don't know, I haven't seen it before. Lord God of Destruction, where did you find this ring to wear it? The temperament is not worthy of you. It's a bit ugly. If you like rings, I have a lot of them." Saying that, Weiss waved his hand and took out all the rings he had collected. "Did I have a ring on my hand when I was in a coma?" Destroyer looked serious. He felt a little strange. "No, I looked at you every day at that time. If there is something extra in your body, I know best," Weiss said with certainty. The god of destruction interrupted Weiss. Judging from Weiss's expression, he really didn't know where the ring came from. If he didn't put it on before he fell into a coma, then the ring flew to his hand after he woke up. The god of destruction was thoughtful, and then an idea popped into his mind. Could it be the effect of that black ball? Chapter 243 Find Super Dragon Ball. Chapter 243 Looking for Super Dragon Ball. 6th Universe. After the god of destruction was sober, he went to find Shampa, but he didn't tell him anything. Shampa wanted to ask a lot, but every time he wanted to ask, the god of destruction would always find the topic in advance and miss it. After being interrupted many times, Shampa felt a little uncomfortable, so he simply stopped asking. Since his father's angel handed him a diary that day, he has always had an idea in his heart, and he has been clamoring for it. Like a small seedling, the longer it grows, the taller it becomes, and he can no longer control it. Especially in those days when the god of destruction was in a coma, Shampa thought a lot. He was no longer the stupid Shampa who only knew how to eat, drink, and have fun. His father and mother had to pay so much in exchange for the high status of himself and the god of destruction. He heard that after collecting the 7 Super Dragon Balls, he can summon the Super Dragon and realize his wish, and there is no wish that cannot be fulfilled. He wants his family back to life, so he must find Super Dragon Ball. Since the god of destruction went to the 5th universe with him last time and brought back his father's side weapon, he has never looked for him again. Shampa stood alone among the stars in the 6th universe, blowing the cold wind, thinking about these issues. The wind was a bit strong, but he was unmoved, as if only in this way could he become awake. And Vados looked at Shampa's lonely back not far away. Her eyes were full of distress. She had a cloak in her hand, but Shampa would not be disturbed, so she could only wait here for Shampa, silently guarding him. Shampa closed his eyes and massaged his temples with both hands. He was too tired recently. He was about to fight with King Quan, and he was worried about the god of destruction. There were still many things in his heart. In fact, Shampa knew for a long time that Vados was watching him not far away, but his mood had not calmed down. After waiting for a long time, as if wanting to understand something, Shampa strode back. Seeing this, Vados quickly handed over the cloak, afraid that Shampa would catch a cold, and looked at Shampa worriedly. Shampa smiled comfortingly at Vados. "Don't worry about me, it's okay. Vados, do you know about Super Dragon Ball?" Vados didn't expect Shampa to ask this question. His eyes were slightly stunned, and then he said, "I heard that it seems that if you collect all 7, you can summon the dragon, so that the dragon will fulfill the wish, but I just don't know if it's true." Shampa told himself in his heart that even if it was a fake, he had to try it, and his eyes became very firm. At this time, his eyes were so serious for the first time. "Then do you know where Super Dragon Ball is?" Shampa looked at Vados expectantly. Vados dragged his chin and thought for a long time. Before, I heard from the great priest that there are ancient records in the monuments, and it seems that the Super Dragon Ball was mentioned. If you want to know where the Dragon Ball is, you can ask Zuno. Shanpa listened to Vado's words and searched for Zuno's memory in his own memory. He vaguely remembered that Zuno seemed to be a magical figure in the universe who could know the existence of all history, and was familiar with the universe. Everything of. In Shampa's mind, at this time, there was only one thought. He wanted to resurrect his father, and he wanted to find his mother. In order to find Super Dragon Ball, Shampa took Vados to Lord Zuno's planet. Then, when he just arrived on Zuno's planet, he was stunned, and his mouth opened in surprise, as if he could swallow an egg. Don't ask why Papa looks like this, because the planet Zuno is full of people, the long line seems to be able to circle the universe, and he can still hear the people in the line ahead. But nothing more, the praise of Mr. Zunuo. What Zunuo is an omniscient person, it is very inconceivable, even people who have never met can know what they have eaten today. So Shampa obediently stood at the back of the team, but he was so impatient that he didn't move a step forward for a long time. He was a little anxious and kept looking at the endless team ahead. So he asked Vados to go ahead to inquire about the news. Seeing that Vados came back dejected, Shampa couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? How long is the queue ahead?" "I asked the person in charge just now, and he said that Mr. Zuno's schedule is now decades away, and we can't keep up." Shampa was a little anxious. "Then you didn't say, the god of destruction in the 6th universe, is Shampa here?" Vados was in a low mood and muttered, "Besides, I have revealed your identity, and he will not let us jump in the queue, saying that we should treat everyone equally, even if anyone comes. It is not easy, everyone is in this queue. For a long time, it is impossible for us to go through the back door." Quote. Vados remembered that when he was talking to the steward, the eyes of those in line were like knives, stabbing her on her body, as if mocking her for wanting to go through the back door. He didn't dare to tell Shampa about these things, for fear that Shampa would do something out of the ordinary, so he silently endured it. And LT, title and GT, through Dragon Ball, I am Beerus_text chapter 241-260.txt and LT, title and GT. Chapter 244 Make a Wish. Chapter 244 Wishing. Shampa stared at the team, thoughtfully. After thinking for a long time, the person in front seemed to have heard the conversation between the two of them, and looked back at them with disgust. In the past, Shampa's temper would have made his parents unrecognizable, but now, after all, people have to bow their heads under the eaves. In case of a big trouble, Zuo refused to tell the location of Super Dragon Ball. Why? Manage. Now he can only bear it. He thinks it's better to come back another day. So before leaving, he looked at the group of people with no deep meaning, remembered those who made him uncomfortable, and thought that they must pay the price in the future. If he doesn't beat them to the ground, he will not be Shampa. Shampa's revenge book has already made a deep note for them. Of course, the culprit is Zuno. Because of him, he will be like this. Suffocated. But instead of taking Vados back to the 6th universe, he went directly to the 7th universe to find the god of destruction. With so many ideas, he must have a solution. Shampa's expression was not very happy, the air pressure beside him dropped even lower, and the whole person was slumped along the way. Vados had already sensed Shampa's angry mood. It must be the eyes of those people that made him feel uncomfortable. Thinking that thanks to myself for not telling her grievances, Shampa would definitely explode with anger. When he arrived in the 7th universe, he saw the god of destruction and was eating. Before he could say hello, Shampa rushed up with a stride, only to see a black figure, accompanied by a gust of wind, coming towards the dining table. Of course, accompanied by the Black Hand. The god of destruction and Weiss looked at each other and said nothing. When Shampa and Vados appeared in the 7th universe, the detector had already detected their arrival. Weiss calmly filled the god of destruction with tea. The god of destruction was like a gentleman, drinking tea gracefully. His lips took a deep sip of the tea, not even a glance at the sudden appearance. Pa. As a result, Shangpa, who was in a bad mood, became even more aggrieved. He picked up the delicious cake and ate it in a big mouth. He vented all his emotions on the food, as if the food owed him 8 million, gobbled it up. Eating in the mouth. Destruction God and Whis are not surprised by this elephant pagoda, they say nothing and do whatever they need to do. But looking at his master like this, Vados's face can't be hung up, which is really shameful, but thinking that Shangpa has been holding back on Zuno's planet without losing his temper, it's already very good, so he simply thought about it. When Shangpa finally had enough to eat and drink, there was nothing intact on the dining table, and it had been swept away by Shangpa. Shangpa took a fork and stabbed the meat in the bowl vigorously, as if it had something to do with the meat. What a great hatred! The god of destruction first glanced at Shangpa's stomach. His eyes seemed to wonder, what is this stomach made of, and it can hold so many things. Shangpa didn't speak, and the god of destruction didn't ask, but the sound of the fork and plate rubbing against the plate was a bit harsh and annoying. God of destruction couldn't stand it anymore, looked up and asked, "What's wrong? The 6th universe was ruined by your eating, come to my 7th universe and eat it." Couldn't help but jokingly said, "Master Shangpa, are you full? I'll go get you some more. Don't destroy the plate." Shangpa looked at the unrecognizable meat, put the meat into his mouth, chewed hard, his back molars rattled, and then put down his fork with a snap, all revealing that he was very angry at this time, but he was not talking. The god of destruction had no choice but to ask Vados, who followed behind, "Vados, what's wrong with Shangpa? Are you angry?" Vados' eyes were hesitant, as if he was trying to figure out how to say it, so that Mr. Shangpa would not lose face too much. "Master Shangpa wanted to find the Super Dragon Ball, and then I heard that Master Zuno knew everything between heaven and earth, so I wanted to ask Master Zuno the location of the Dragon Ball, but there were too many people in line. I'll go report. Lord Zuno also refuses to see our Lord, and insists we have to queue up together like everyone else, saying that there is no schedule now, and the schedule has been scheduled for decades." The further Vados spoke, the lower his voice, because she had seen Shangpa's face, which became worse and worse as she spoke. When Vados mentioned Dragon Ball, the god of destruction was stunned and quickly returned to nature. The god of destruction looked at Shangpa suspiciously. "What are you doing with Super Dragon Ball?" "It's not because I heard that if you collect 7 Super Dragon Balls, you can summon Shenlong and make a wish, otherwise you think I'd like to see other people's faces." Shangpa's tone was not good, and his eyes were even more vicious, as if he thought of something. "What wish do you want? You have nothing left," the god of destruction asked slowly. "Of course, it's my father's resurrection." Shangpa's expression suddenly became serious, his eyes blurred but firm. Chapter 245 Zuma. Chapter 245 Zuma. Hearing Shangpa's serious words, it was rare that the god of destruction also became serious. No one spoke, and the silence in the air was a little scary. The god of destruction came back to his senses, the corners of his mouth rose, and he returned to his previous day's look. He couldn't help making fun of Shangpa, and laughed at Shangpa playfully. The god of destruction in the dignified 6th universe was actually driven out. The person in charge must not dare not report it. It should be Zu Nuo who doesn't want to see you. How embarrassing to be unwilling to accept the elephants of the 6th universe. Quote. Shangpa slapped the table vigorously in exasperation. The table was overwhelmed and began to crack, and then collapsed with a bang. "Don't talk nonsense here, that old man. If I hadn't asked him for something, I would have beaten him up a long time ago," Shangpa said angrily. The more he thought about it, the more angry he became. And Zuno in the distance couldn't help but sneezed. "Anyway, I'm fine lately, so I'll take a trip for you." The god of destruction looked at the shriveled appearance of Papa, and was a little happy. There was a smile in his words, and he wanted to meet the legendary ancestor who was so amazing. "Promise. I'm going to." Shangpao stood up, looking like he was going to work hard. The god of destruction glanced at Shangpa and said arrogantly, "You. Forget it, it's not enough to be turned away once. hurry up and buy me a new table and wait for me in Universe 7. Quote. Because of the palm of the elephant, the god of destruction has lost the only dining table. Zuno obviously does not want to see the elephant, so it is useless to bring the elephant. It is better to let him look at the 7th universe for himself. After all, things are quite many. God of Destruction not only wanted to inquire about Super Dragon Ball and resurrect their father, but he also wanted to ask about the black ball. He looked at the ring in his hand and always felt that the black ball was not just as simple as having huge energy. So he took Whis and set off to Zuno's planet. When the God of Destruction first arrived on planet Zuno, there was a sudden thunder and lightning in the sky, and the large dark cloud pressed down aggressively. I don't know if it was an illusion. The dark cloud was getting darker and darker, as if it should not appear here. But at the moment when the muffled thunder sounded, there seemed to be a roar of animals. Following this sound, the dark clouds dissipated, the sun came out again, and a colorful rainbow appeared, and the flowers and trees on the planet Zuno, they all came alive in an instant. The God of Destruction frowned when he saw the change in the vision that descended on this day. In just a split second, a big face rushed towards the God of Destruction. At first glance, it looked like a gourd baby. The God of Destruction took a step back subconsciously, distanced himself from the person who came, and looked suspiciously at the person who was about to rush over at any time. I saw that the people around me were calling this strange creature that suddenly appeared, Master Zuno. Because he had only heard that Zunuo was a magical being who knew everything, but he had never seen it before, and thought he was a knowledgeable old man. The God of Destruction couldn't help but hummed a few words in his heart. Gourd baby, 7 flowers on a vine, not afraid of wind and rain, la 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 la. I saw that Mr. Zunuo, who had not been out for 800 years, flew out and rushed out before he could tell. At this time, he was staring at the God of Destruction with wide eyes in surprise, but he always felt that there was something strange on his face. Smile. Even the people lining up on the side were also very puzzled. Who could let Lord Zuno personally greet him? No one in the universe does not know how big Zunuo's shelf is, and no one will buy it. Looking at the majestic God of Destruction, someone in the crowd recognized that this was the famous God of Destruction in the 7th universe, Lord God of Destruction. No wonder Lord Zuno came out in person. Looking at the people beside him, getting more and more restless, Zuno said politely, Master Destruction, it's too noisy outside, I don't know what you want from me, let's go inside and talk alone. He raised his eyebrows, his eyes locked on the God of Destruction, because he sensed something, but he wasn't sure. The God of Destruction is also looking at Zuno, who is coming from the opposite side, watching him, staring at him all the time. That look is like looking at the prey. He feels very uncomfortable, but when he thinks that he has something to come, he is expressionless, nodded. The God of Destruction was puzzled and followed Zunuo inside. Along the way, he received eyes from all directions and felt very uncomfortable. He thought that when Champa came, it must be because these people were angry. Zuo has been walking in front, although he can't see Zunuo's expression, but the God of Destruction can still feel that Zuo lowered his head and has been muttering something in a low voice. Although it is not far away, the God of Destruction still can't hear it. Taiching, very curious in my heart. What's even more curious is what happened to the strange scene that suddenly appeared when I went to planet Zuno. Presumably the person in front will give me an answer. Along the way, the two have different thoughts. Chapter 246 Special Treatment. Chapter 246 Special Treatment. Zuno took the God of Destruction back to his room, but the room was huge and empty, surrounded by green beads. I don't know why, the lights were also on during the day, which was a little weird. Maybe mysterious people are always a little weird. Same fetish. Entering the room, Weiss couldn't help laughing in his heart, thinking of Champa's dejected appearance. Now the treatment is so different. Not only did he meet Zuno, but he was also personally received and brought into the room. What a world of difference compared to the scene where Champa was turned away. Although Zuno planet is in the 7th universe, it is under the jurisdiction of the God of Destruction, but I heard that this Zunuo is very arrogant, and no one has special treatment. Maybe because the people who come to him are asking for something from him, so they can only endure Zuno's strange temper. Otherwise, the god of destruction in the 6th universe cannot be allowed to line up normally. It's been 10 years. Not only did Weiss think about it a lot, but the god of destruction also thought about it. He didn't know if Zuno was vain. After all, things about Black Ball were extraordinary. If the people of the whole king knew something, I'm afraid it would be incredible. Along the way, the tangled eyebrows of the god of destruction have been twisted into a Sichuan character. In the end, whether or not to ask Zuno about the Black Ball has always puzzled him. Although Zuno has a rule that he will not reveal the question asked, but the god of destruction. It's hard to trust a stranger. The god of destruction endured a lot of doubts. He saw that there was a person exactly like Zuno. Except for the different clothes, he was a little shorter than Zuno. The rest of the place seemed to be carved out of a mold. Seeing Zuo coming in, he hurriedly greeted him. Lord Zuno, what happened? Why were you in such a hurry when you went out just now? The sound was not too small, just enough to be heard by the god of destruction and Weiss behind. It's nothing, you go out first, I have guests. Zuno waved his hand, trying to screen him off. But he is very strange. All the people who came to ask questions in the past, Mr. Zuno will let him be present and will not avoid it. What is going on today? Who is so face? It is not only worthy of Mr. Zuno to go out in person to greet him, but also to be alone conversation. Immediately, I saw the person who came in to fight, the dignified god of destruction in the 7th universe, the god of destruction, thinking of today, planet Zuno, it is really lively. First, the destruction god Elephant Pa and his angels from Universe 6 came to visit, and then the famous destruction god and his angels came to visit. He remembered the previous rumors that the destruction god had become a demon. His eyes were inadvertently scrutinized, and they flowed on the god of destruction. God of destruction felt that someone was looking at him, but that kind of eyes seemed to be looking at some goods. Remembering the eyes he received along the way, he was a little irritable, and his eyes fell on the little gourd baby. Receiving the look of destruction god casually falling on him, he suddenly felt very stressed. Although he knew that destruction god couldn't hear what he was thinking, he still felt a little guilty and lowered his head silently. He quickly retracted his thoughts just now, called Lord God of Destruction respectfully, and slowly exited the room. In the room, there were only 3 people left, the god of destruction, Zuno, and Weiss, and the air was silent. The god of destruction looked at Zunuo and felt that he not only looked like a Matryoshka doll, but also a gourd doll. From entering the room, without saying a word, the huge back was always facing the god of destruction. Although planet Zuno is in his own 7th universe, the god of destruction has never cared about this number 1 character, but it is just rumored to be amazing. Rumors are not credible at all, and they will only spread more and more. God of destruction understands this deeply. Only when Zuno does have something, but he will not know everything about the Milky Way like the legend. So he never cared. If it wasn't for Shangpa saying that he wanted to make a wish, he would not have come to inquire about that Dragon Ball. What kind of wishing ball? He didn't believe it at all, thinking that only a fool like Pa would believe it. After waiting for a long time, Zuno didn't feel it, the angel of the god of destruction. Wes wanted to go out, so he couldn't help frowning, and then slowly moved his body, turned around, and faced the destruction. God. The moment when the god of destruction came to Zuno planet just now, a vision that day woke Zuno up. Zuno knew that a special person had appeared. After waiting for so long, he finally arrived. There was an inexplicable excitement in his eyes. It's the breath of mighty power, it's the breath of a black ball, it's... Zunuo, what are you doing? You came in for a long time and didn't speak. Are you kidding me? There was an impatient voice in the air. The god of destruction was really impatient at this time, and he brought him in without speaking. His mood was already at the low end. Master god of destruction, can you let your angel go out? There is something I want to talk to you about alone. Zuno raised his small eyes and said slowly. Chapter 247 Talk Alone. Chapter 247 Talk Alone. There was silence in the air again, and the sound of breathing became more and more obvious. No need, Weiss is my angel. If you have something to do, just say it, don't shy away from him. The god of destruction's tone was very unkind. Zuno also sensed the bad mood of the god of destruction, and immediately said, don't you want to know something about the black ball? Zuno's eyes were smiling, but it was a little weird. His eyes were full of insight into all the secrets. Such an attitude was not afraid of angering the god of destruction. Maybe he was very sure that the black ball was like a major bomb and would definitely cause damage. God's attention. There was a trace of consternation in the eyes of the god of destruction. Originally, he was still wondering whether to ask about the black ball or not. Unexpectedly, Zuno made it clear at once and said the black ball. It's just that the god of destruction has already told Wes the secrets of the black ball one by one, so he still feels that there is nothing for Wes to avoid. Zuno saw the hesitation that flashed in the eyes of the god of destruction. Although he quickly recovered to nature, he was still captured by him. Who made him keep staring at the god of destruction? Immediately, he added another fire and said calmly, Sir, god of destruction, you are not curious, how did the black ball in your body disappear after you woke up? When Zuno saw the god of destruction for the first time, he felt the traces of the black ball in the god of destruction. Also, the god of destruction had the aura of the black ball. Although others could not see it, he could feel the black ball. Presence of the ball. Perhaps the strange phenomenon that suddenly appeared on planet Zuno was related to the black ball, or it was related to the god of destruction himself, but it didn't matter which reason, he didn't care. He clearly saw the god of destruction's surprise, and knew that god of destruction must have a lot of doubts in his heart. Looking at his appearance, he must not know how powerful the black ball really is. The calm water is like throwing a stone, breaking his original tranquility, becoming calm. The god of destruction has a calm face, and his heart has already been shaken, because he wants to know the secret of the black ball too much. But looking at Zuno's meaning, if Weiss didn't go out, he wouldn't tell the black ball. That attitude made him a little uncomfortable, but he didn't want to miss the black ball. Weiss is the person who understands the god of destruction best, and he sees the meaning of the god of destruction. Before he has time to instruct Weiss took the initiative to speak sympathetically. Master Destruction, since Master Zuno wants to talk to you alone, there must be something important to say. Wes will wait for you outside. Nothing is more important, isn't it? Enduring the calm for a while, Wes was telling the god of destruction not to be impulsive. If you want to know the secret of the black ball, you can only do this. When you know the news of the black ball, it is not too late to do anything. The god of destruction understood what Wes's meant, did not refute, and nodded lightly at Wes's, and Wes's quietly withdrew. He's just not used to the feeling of being dominated by others, but he still has reason in his heart. The most important thing is to know what secrets the black ball is hiding. In the empty room, at this time, only the god of destruction and Zuno were left. What do you want to say? Hurry up and say it, don't grind it. The god of destruction said arrogantly. He was very unhappy, and he didn't have the attitude of asking for help. Master Destruction God, don't worry, it's just that the secret of the black ball is really inconvenient to tell in front of others. Zuno was also afraid of making the god of destruction angry, so he had to say that before. Speak up if you have something to say, and let your fart go. The god of destruction sat down on the stool with a lazy expression. I saw the traces left by the black ball in your body, but don't worry, it is difficult for others to detect it. How did you get this black ball? Zuno also has his own thoughts. It was a coincidence. The god of destruction looked uncooperative. Zuno was a little uncomfortable when he saw that the god of destruction didn't want to talk nonsense. I must have made the god of destruction unhappy just now, and continued to explain carefully. That's it, only if I know where the black ball came from, can I tell the black ball about it? This is something I promised others. Quote. The god of destruction understood, and Zuno promised that person that he should be afraid of the black ball falling into the wrong hands. Most of the anger has disappeared, and his face has also eased a lot. It was given to me by my father's angel with the diary. The black ball entered my body at once. I didn't care, but then I fell into a coma. In my dream, I dreamed that the black ball was testing me, but when he woke up he disappeared. The god of destruction recalled the situation at that time, his eyes blurred. The black ball actually entered the body of the god of destruction, which made Zuo puzzled. This is a situation that has never happened in hundreds of millions of years. There are often people who want to take the black ball as their own and improve themselves, but the god of destruction has received the power of the black ball without knowing it. Is it because of the fate of the black ball? Chapter 248 The Ring Again. Chapter 248 mentions the ring again. Looking at Zhu Nuo's wanton eyes in front of him, God of Destruction frowned and couldn't help interrupting him. Hey, Zuno, what are you thinking? Speak. This voice broke Zhu Nuo's thinking, and his erratic eyes slowly returned to normal, but there was still a hint of confusion in his eyes. It's the first time I've heard of such a situation. Don't blame Zuno for not knowing about it, because the power of the black ball is too powerful for him to detect it, so he knows very little. The god of destruction suddenly doubted Zuno a little, and said that he knew everything and knew everything. Zuno said calmly again, it may be that the black ball has the same magnetic field as you, so it will automatically recognize the master. It's just that the god of destruction pursed his lips tightly without saying a word, waiting for Zuno to continue to explain his doubts. The god of destruction played with his hands, and the fingers of both hands continued to circle in circles, but this time there was an extra ring, and the god of destruction rubbed the black ring with intent, pursing his lips, adding a pair of incomprehensible to himself. The black ball disappeared from your body, which proves that the black ball has been integrated into your body, and no one else can grab it. He is very smart. He knows not to cause you trouble, and he hides his breath. That was not discovered by you. The god of destruction casually followed Zuno's words. Zuo's eyes were stunned, and then he was a little embarrassed. It's just that I'm too sensitive to him, too sensitive. The ghost knows how many years he has studied this black ball, and the last thing he knows is only a little bit, which makes him have a deep sense of frustration. Zuo knew astronomy and geography, but he was confused by a small black ball for many years, and it made people laugh out loud. Seeing that the god of destruction did not intend to continue speaking, Zuno continued to talk about the black ball. Presumably, you have already received it. I can feel part of his power. The god of destruction nodded slightly. Zuno, who was affirmed, started talking again. Immediately, Zuno was a little tired from talking. He picked up the teacup next to him, took a few sips of tea, and slowed his dry mouth. After all, he had talked for so long, but he didn't feel tired about this black ball. But as the god of destruction was also drinking tea, Zuno's eyes lit up, staring at the god of destruction's hand without blinking. His eyes were burning like a hungry wolf, and his saliva was about to flow out. Feeling Zhu Nuo's eyes, the god of destruction glanced subconsciously. Zhu Nuo was staring at the ring that was suddenly put on his hand. What's wrong with this ring? The god of destruction said softly. He thought it was not easy at first, but now it was verified in Zuno's eyes. Where did you get it? Zuno suppressed his emotions and asked slowly. I don't know either, but after I accepted the power of the black ball, I found out in my hand whether it has something to do with the black ball, but the strange thing is that I can't take it off no matter how I pick it. In order to confirm his words, the god of destruction symbolically began to pull out the ring, but if it was true as the god of destruction said, the ring could not be taken off at all. This ring has the scent of a black ball, but now he is closed, so it has no effect. After Zuno finished speaking, he turned the topic back to the black ball. The body of the black ball has endless energy, not only energy, but also other functions. Those who get it will benefit for a lifetime. The god of destruction followed Zuno's words, and then slowly dispelled his doubts, because he had experienced the power of the black ball. How much power he has depends on how much faith you have with him. As for how much energy you have, it depends on how you tap it. In the end, Zuno ended this separate conversation with this sentence. Listening to Zuno's words, the god of destruction wanted to know more and became more and more interested in this black ball, squinting slightly, looking at Zuno. The god of destruction wanted to know more, and planned to ask a clear question, but Zuno faltered, his eyes dodged. No matter if the god of destruction was coercion or lure, he was unmoved and refused to say anything. The destruction cannons in the hands of the god of destruction are already full of energy, and they are ready to fire. If you don't tell me, I will smash you here. Zuno just glanced at it lightly. He knew that the god of destruction could do such a thing, but he had some things. Before the time came, he couldn't say what fate would be affected. He couldn't bear it. Immediately told the god of destruction, "Don't ask any more questions, I won't say anything, and the god of destruction will know everything in the future." The god of destruction didn't seem to let go of Zuno's prying, knowing that if he continued to entangle him, he wouldn't be able to ask anything. Seeing the figure of the god of destruction leaving, Zuno breathed a sigh of relief, and then he was thoughtful, his eyes were blank, and he didn't know what the problem was. When the figure disappeared, he still stood there without moving. Chapter 249 Tribute. Chapter 249 Tribute. The god of destruction strode forward and walked out of Zuno's room. Although Zuno refused to tell anything in the end, in fact, Zuno had said a lot. He already knew the general situation of the black ball. It's up to him how much black ball can play in the future, and it's really worth a trip to Zuno's planet. He looked relaxed and walked leisurely. But, accidentally, the black ring that his fingers touched made his pace stagnate and his speed slowed down. The god of destruction has more doubts in his heart. This ring is closed, and how to open it, it is only the old guy of Zuno who refuses to say it. Weiss saw the god of destruction come out and walked over. "Lord Destruction, how is it?" His expression was eager, because he knew that his Lord Destroyer paid special attention to this black ball. "Well, go back and talk." The god of destruction's eyes were as calm as water, without the slightest turbulence, as if he had something on his mind. It's just that they just walked not far, only to hear the god of destruction slap Wes next to him. "Weiss, let's go, I forgot to ask Shumpa about the wishing ball." The god of destruction and Weiss, memory are not very good, and their thoughts were interrupted by Zuno, and all their energy was in the dark on the ball. "I forgot about it." So the two returned to Zuno's room with great fanfare. Zuno was sitting in a chair, calming down, when he saw the god of destruction, who had walked and turned back, came back with his angel. "What's the matter, god of destruction?" said respectfully. "It's all right, I have one more thing to ask you about the wishing ball." There was no emotion in the god of destruction's words. "Wishing ball." Zuno looked at the god of destruction in surprise. "It's about that super dragon ball." The god of destruction was annoyed when he said one more sentence, but he agreed to Shumpa and had to ask again. "Master god of destruction, Zuno has a rule that if you have something to ask me, you must make a tribute. Of course, I took the initiative to tell you about that just now, so you don't have to. If you want to know about Super Dragon Ball, just to make a tribute." Zuno replied plainly, although he knew that the god of destruction in front of him was not easy to mess with, but this was his principle. If a precedent was set for the god of destruction, there would be no way to ask others to do so in the future. "What tribute? I didn't bring a gift this time. I'll make it up for you when I come next time." The god of destruction was also puzzled. He clearly didn't see the people lining up at the door just now, but he didn't see anything in their hands. Zuno shook his head and did not speak. Whis approached the god of destruction and whispered, "If you want Lord Zuno to answer a question, you must kiss him first. If you are kissed by a man, you can only ask one question. If you are kissed by a woman, you can ask a few more questions, but it depends on Zuno." Weiss had heard Zuno's rules, but he didn't know why it was so strange, so he told the god of destruction what he knew. What? The god of destruction cried out in surprise, looking at Zuno strangely. Why did he suddenly think this guy was a pervert? Zuno accepted the god of destruction's eyes openly, as if he was used to it, and his eyes did not evade in the slightest. Why are there such strange rules? The god of destruction frowned, and his tone became a little disgusting. God of destruction, there's nothing you can do. This is a rule that has been handed down for thousands of years. If you can't make a tribute, please forgive me for not being able to tell you about Super Dragon Ball. Zuno's eyes flashed with firmness. Having seen Zuno's stubbornness, the god of destruction knows that there is no other way than to offer tribute. Immediately looking at Weiss was stunned for a moment, and his eyes met the god of destruction. He regrets coming in a little bit. Why he has such a tacit understanding with the god of destruction. It's not what he imagined, right, but his beautiful imagination was quickly broken. The god of destruction saw that Weiss had not moved, raised his eyebrows, and waved in the direction of Zuno. Weiss, go. Weiss' pupils shrank suddenly, and he pointed at himself suspiciously, as if he was confirming something. Although he usually looks like he doesn't care about anything, and is a bit mother-in-law, but after all, this is kissing someone, and he is still such a person. So the big hand of the god of destruction seemed to be casually placed on Weiss's shoulder. Weiss felt a little heavy, as if there was a sense of threat in it. Weiss's body trembled and immediately became very stiff. Weiss continued to pretend to be stupid, as if he didn't understand, and looked at the god of destruction in front of him with hazy eyes. What? You don't go, or you want me to kiss him? Seeing that Weiss didn't move, the god of destruction was a little impatient, so the threatening eyes in the arm were straining, and Weiss was a little frightened. In the end, under the strong eyes of the god of destruction, Weiss hesitated and compromised. Sure enough, he picked it up and could be sacrificed by the god of destruction at any time, and his heart kept mourning. Chapter 250 Kiss. Chapter 250 Kiss. Weiss slowly dragged his body and slowly moved to Zuno's side, like a snail. After approaching reluctantly, he looked at Zuno's face. He didn't move for a long time. Those tangled eyes has flashed countless emotions. He clenched his hands tightly, because the time was too long, and his palms were already sweaty, as if he was doing ideological activities for himself. Especially after looking at Zuno's big face from the side, his heart hurts even more. The curvature of the corners of Zuno's mouth has remained the same, but there is a half smile in his eyes, which makes Weiss even more uncomfortable. He suddenly became firm, showing his eyes that immediately went out, as if he was going to die. Anyway, he would die sooner or later, so he might as well be happy. Anyway, he couldn't escape. Weiss comforted himself in his heart, and then summoned up his courage to kiss Zuno's face quickly, so fast that he couldn't help but smack his tongue. Almost the moment his lips touched Zuno's face, Weiss left immediately, as if avoiding some poisonous scorpion and beast. His hands were quietly relieved, and he simply gave up. There are other things, Lord Zuno, he can't act rashly. He regrets coming with Lord Destroyer at this time, and Lord Champa, why can't he help us, Lord Destroyer? But there were some dark and unclear emotions in those eyes, and it was like eating countless flies in my heart, and it was a little disgusting. The kiss is over, is that all right? The god of destruction noticed Weiss's expression. He couldn't bear to look directly, and asked lazily. Well, Zuno nodded slightly. His expression remained the same from beginning to end, even though he had already seen in his heart that Weiss was unwilling. But there was no way. This is the rule. If you want to ask a question, you have to make a tribute. After receiving Zuno's affirmation, Weiss rushed back to the god of destruction like an arrow from the string. He didn't know how to look at Zuno on the opposite side. He really couldn't agree with this habit. Since Lord Weiss is a male, after presenting the tribute, I can only ask one question. Lord God of Destruction, we can start now. Zuno's voice was calm, his eyes narrowed slightly, and nothing else changed. The god of destruction did not hesitate, and then slowly opened his mouth to ask the question of what he promised Shumpa during his trip. Tell me all the information about that wishing ball. Although he was asking questions, his tone was not like asking for help at all, and some were even more arrogant, which was also in line with the god of destruction's usual character. But Zuno didn't care about the attitude of the god of destruction. Hearing the question, he immediately opened his mouth to describe the information about Dragon Ball. It doesn't matter if it's called a wishing ball. The god of destruction saw that Zuno had already started to answer, and quickly glanced at Weiss and asked him to quickly follow the record. As the saying goes, good memory is not as good as bad writing, and it is better to take notes. After receiving the order, Weiss made a small notebook and a pen out of nowhere, listened intently, and prepared to record, quite a bit like. Zuno continued to speak methodically. Wishing Ball or Super Dragon Ball. It was made in the 41st year of the Divine Calendar and was made by the dragon god Salama with a diameter of 37,196.224 kilometers. The shape of pure solid. There are 7 in total, and they are ordered in the 6th universe and the 7th universe respectively. Quote. So big, isn't it as big as a planet? Weiss was puzzled in his heart, but he didn't ask a voice. He waited for Zuno to continue talking. He glanced at the god of destruction with his peripheral vision, and found that Lord God of Destruction was already a little wandering. He knew that the god of destruction hated this kind of chatter the most, and his eyes were already full of impatience, and he was even on the verge of breaking out. Withdrew his Piaoyuan eyes, and continued to memorize the Dragon Ball information that Zunuo said seriously. Since the god of destruction can't hear it, he will take it down and show it to the god of destruction for a look, but he wants to as always that simple. Zuno was fine at the beginning. Although the voice was very mechanical, it was at a normal speed, but the more he spoke, the faster he spoke, as if he had doubled the speed. The god of destruction couldn't help frowning and looked at Wes next to him. At a glance. And Wes, who was recording, was even more miserable. The corner of his mouth was flattened to the side, and his eyes flashed a hint of anxiety. Zuno spoke so fast, he couldn't keep up. He felt that this Zuo must be taking revenge on him. Zuo remembered the way he disliked just now, so he waited for an opportunity to retaliate. There was already a thin layer of fine sweat on his forehead, and he didn't have time to wipe it. But under the hand, the writing action was even faster, and it had already taken off. He felt like he was about to throw the pen out. Although Weiss had worked hard to write, his hand gradually became a little harder, and the others behind him couldn't keep up. Now, I can only write what I hear. Chapter 251 Dragon Ball Location. Chapter 251 The Location of Dragon Ball. These 7 Dragon Balls are all glowing with golden light, and in these beads, there are red star marks ranging from 1 to 7. In order to make this red mark visible from any angle, the beads use the principle of refraction. Quote. In fact, this is Weiss, heart of a villain to treat a gentleman's belly. Zuo has always been like this, and there is no intention to treat anyone. Zuno was still talking, but the god of destruction was already a little drowsy. The upper eyelid and the lower eyelid had already begun to fight, and the eyes were rubbing together, slowly closing them little by little, then opening them again. Open, try not to sleep. Zuno had noticed God of Destruction's sleepy appearance, but it was not affected at all. This Dragon Ball is the original structure of the dragon god Salama. In the 42 years of the god's calendar, he obtained the patent right. After collecting 7 beads distributed in 2 universes, he shouted in the language of the god, "Come out. Come on, dragon of the gods. Please grant my wish." What was said later, the god of destruction was completely unconscious, and he really couldn't stand the sleepiness. He felt that Zuno was just like in class, grinding and chirping, and it made people particularly sleepy when he said it. Okay, the question is over. Zuno told the god of destruction what he knew. There was no response for a long time, and Weiss had stopped the pen he was recording, and looked at what he recorded. Some couldn't bear to look directly, the dense words were like spiders crawling, and he couldn't help covering his eyes. This is not his normal level, it must not be, because Zuno spoke too fast, and he flew the words to keep up. Weiss was about to bury his face in the book, but there was always silence in the air. Weiss didn't hear the voice of the god of destruction for a long time, and then raised his head. Seeing the god of destruction's closed eyes and the sound of his breathing in an orderly manner all means that the god of destruction has fallen asleep, and he can fall asleep while standing, which is true. Weiss rolled his eyes at the sky, the god of destruction could not see it anyway. Immediately, Weiss slowly moved to the god of destruction. Before he could call the god of destruction, his arm was already stretched in the air, and he was about to pat the god of destruction on the shoulder. But just in the nick of time, the god of destruction, who was still asleep, stretched out his hand and grabbed the arm that Weiss was going to do. Weiss held his arm and cried out in pain, "Lord Destruction, let go, it's me, I'm Weiss." The body also bent, trying to reduce the pain, but the pain still spread from the arm to the fingertips, infinite expansion. The god of destruction immediately opened his eyes and stared at Weiss with sharp eyes. Weiss wanted to withdraw his hand, but the god of destruction was still drowsy in his eyes. At this time, Zuno on the opposite side suddenly looked at the god of destruction, because when the god of destruction woke up just now, he did not miss the flashing red eyes, it was the power of the black ball. After a while, he seemed to have completely woken up and let go of Weiss's hand. Weiss was relieved and touched his almost dislocated arm, with grievances in his eyes. "Weiss, why did you suddenly attack me?" The god of destruction still had the dissatisfaction of being awakened in his eyes. Weiss was still rubbing his arms, and when he heard the words of the god of destruction, he instantly retorted, "I didn't attack you, I saw you fell asleep and wanted to wake you up." Lord Zuno has finished speaking, who knows? You twisted my arm so quickly, my little arm and calf can't stand your torture. The god of destruction looked at Weiss with chills in his eyes. He was too old to pretend to be tender. God of destruction didn't know what was wrong. He slept soundly and was chatting with Duke Joe. Suddenly, he felt a shadow reaching out to him. The first reaction was to stop the shadow. The unconscious behavior, the body acts before consciousness. Who knows what happened? Anyway, in the final analysis, it's Weiss's fault, but just now, the god of destruction felt that his vigilance, reaction and shot speed had improved, and he raised his head just to meet Zunuo's meaningful eyes. Because of Zunuo's special hobby, the god of destruction doesn't like Zunuo now, so he turns his eyes away and speaks even more fiercely. "Then you don't call me, just come up and do something. I thought some monster was going to attack me, you deserve it." Weiss said aggrievedly. "Lord of destruction," Weiss called. "Why didn't Weiss call? You didn't wake up after calling you for a long time. Lord Zuno has been waiting here. I have to pat you to wake up you. Lord Zuno can testify, right?" Immediately, Weiss' head pushed in the direction of Zuno, and looked at Zuno for help. Zuno thought about it, and at this moment, he just nodded, confirming the authenticity of what Weiss said. Seeing that it was indeed like what Weiss said, the god of destruction did not apologize at all. Anyway, he felt that he was right, so he began to change the subject in a serious manner. Where is the specific location of Super Dragon Ball in Universe 6 and Universe 7? Chapter 252 Abacus. Chapter 252 Small Abacus. God of Destruction only remembered this after listening to it for a long time. In fact, Zunuo is long-winded and long-winded. He can listen to a little bit, which is already very good. It just happened to be a useful place. After all, the location of the Dragon Ball is the most important. Although it is said that Super Dragon Ball is in the 6th universe and the 7th universe, but the 6th universe and the 7th universe are so big, they have no way to start. In the vast and boundless universe, finding such a Dragon Ball is tantamount to finding a needle in a haystack. Immediately, he took a general look at Weiss's book, and found that the exact location of the Dragon Ball was indeed not mentioned. But he didn't know why Zuno didn't answer. He looked at Zuno with dissatisfaction, and looked at Weiss in doubt. Weiss shook his head and said he didn't know what was going on. Lord God of Destruction, a question, the question is over. Zuno said slowly. This time, Weiss didn't wait for the God of Destruction to give an order, and immediately rushed to Zuno's side, and gave a generous kiss, without the first coy look at all. It's good to say it, you're familiar with it once again, anyway, it has been given for the first time, so what are you afraid of? Maybe he is so obedient, and the Lord of Destruction will reward him when he goes back. Whis couldn't help but feel a little complacent for his foresight. Even the God of Destruction looked at Whis with admiration, as if to encourage Whis. This time, he finally got it right once. Can this answer our Lord God of Destruction's question? Weiss raised his brows and said proudly. However, Zunuo remained motionless, looking forward, but still did not speak. Weiss stretched out his hand and shook it in front of Zuno. If it wasn't for the blink of an eye, he would suspect that Zuno was also asleep. Male tribute, you can only ask one question at a time, and the interval between each time is 1 year, so the actions of Lord Weiss just now are of no use. Zuno replied flatly. The God of Destruction looked at Zuno with sharp eyes, and Weiss also opened his mouth in surprise. Whis felt that his heart was hit by a 10,000-point crit, or the kind of serial crit, so he walked to the God of Destruction dejectedly, his eyes darkened. I have become a person who is useless to the God of Destruction, and I can't help the God of Destruction. It's more uncomfortable than kissing Zuo just now. Lord God of Destruction, do you want to continue asking the question just now? Zuno stared at the God of Destruction with fiery eyes and asked tentatively. Zuno has always been interested in the God of Destruction, because the power on him always attracts people. The God of Destruction knew that Zuno was reminding himself that he could ask this question as long as he kissed Zunuo, but seeing Wei Wei's reaction just now, he couldn't pass his own test. The God of Destruction, who made a decisive decision, did not hesitate for a second, and refused decisively. Don't ask, come back another day. The God of Destruction waved his hand, and left with Weiss. The God of Destruction doesn't want to sacrifice his dignity for the matter of Champa. He has no interest in kissing a man, and he has already locked a rough position. On their planet, he is not afraid of being preempted by others. If later, it is really in the 6th and 7th universes, if you can't find Super Dragon Ball, let Champa bring Vados to ask Zuno again. Anyway, like Pa has no skin and face, and is so interested in Dragon Ball, I think, if you can sell your color for the problem, it is not good, and his TV, Vados, anyway Vados is a woman, it can be asked many questions. The God of Destruction has long been in his heart, and he has made a wishful little abacus, so he can't let himself suffer. In the 7th universe, in the Hall of God of Destruction, Champa and Vados, who are wandering, are still worried about whether God of Destruction has any information about Super Dragon Ball, and they are looking forward to waiting for God of Destruction and West to return. But he didn't know that he had become a lamb to be betrayed and entered the calculation of the God of Destruction, but he didn't know why. At that moment, they sneezed together, as if foreshadowing something. Just before leaving, the God of Destruction asked a question to the miniature version of Zuno who was guarding outside the door just now. Zuno answered the question whether he would answer the next time someone asked it. Zuno's miniature version of the character, without thinking about it, gave the answer. No matter who asked, as long as the tribute was given, he would answer, regardless of whether the question was repeated or not. The God of Destruction had a point in his heart, and immediately left Zuno's planet. It really came and went in a hurry. It didn't mean a cloud. With this God of Destruction, he left Zuno's planet, and all the new flowers, plants and trees returned to their original appearances in a moment. Zuno looked at the scenery outside the window and sighed deeply. Whether it is a blessing or a curse, it is up to you to taste. Chapter 253 Playing Elephant. Chapter 253 Playing with Elephant Pa. Finally, the God of Destruction and Weiss appeared when Champa was thinking, because the God of Destruction has been gone for so long, and Champa did not know whether he succeeded or not. While handing fruits to the God of Destruction, he asked eagerly, How have you seen Zuno? I saw the god of destruction took the fruit, put it on the table silently, lowered his head, and said nothing. At first glance, he looked like he had failed, like Pa was wandering around beside the god of destruction, like an ant on a hot pot. I didn't see Mr. Zuno, there were too many people in line. Weiss saw the god of destruction with his head lowered and his shoulders quivering. He knew that the Lord of God of Destruction was not crying, he probably saw the god of destruction. Shampa's reaction wanted to laugh. Because the god of destruction had already explained it on the road, and to play with Mr. Shampa, Weiss was afraid that the god of destruction would laugh with one mouthful, and quickly took over the words. God of Destruction did not speak. His mood was low, as if he was confirming this fact. Seeing God of Destruction frustrated, Shampa immediately stood up. You also said that I was ashamed. Zuno's planet is under the jurisdiction of your seventh universe, and you don't listen to you. You are not as good as me. Shampa finally found an opportunity to attack the God of Destruction. Of course, he couldn't let it go. The God of Destruction, who just lowered his head, suddenly raised his head. He couldn't hold it any longer, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became bigger and bigger. I'm going out, and there are still unsuccessful ones. Don't compare me to a fool. Who are you calling a fool? Shampa retorted in disbelief as if he was blown away. The God of Destruction couldn't rely on himself to find out the news, so let's talk about himself like this. Seeing the God of Destruction, he stopped talking, but the smile on the corner of his mouth was all mocking him, and it proved one thing that the fool was talking about him. Shampa realized that he had been tricked, and knew that he would not be able to benefit from the God of Destruction, so he turned around and complained about Weiss. Weiss, following the God of Destruction for so long, you've become bad. Shampa complained about Weiss, but fortunately, after knowing the news of Dragon Ball, he didn't care about the two of them playing him together, even though he couldn't beat him. God of Destruction. Not to mention Weiss, I heard that all the angels are stronger than the God of Destruction. Shampa clearly pointed at Sang and scolded why, but the God of Destruction didn't mind at all. He signaled to Weiss. Weiss took out the small notebook he recorded on Planet Zuno, and wanted to read the above content to Shampa and Vados, and make some popular science. Dragon Ball thing. However, when Shampa saw the book, his eyes lit up, and he grabbed it immediately, looked at the words on it, and raised his head to look at Weiss with disgust. Ugly, it's not his fault. Unexpectedly, Shampa glanced at it, and then slowly read it out. The front was fine, because at that time Weiss's words were still quite satisfactory. It is also becoming more and more arrogant, and Shampa is very attentive in reading. The God of Destruction glanced at Shampa and the book, remembered something, and a strange emotion flashed in his eyes. Give it to Wes, let him read it, presumably he will remember his own words. The casual look was full of majesty. For some reason, when the God of Destruction opened his mouth, Shampa subconsciously listened to the God of Destruction, and handed the book to Wes again, only to feel wrong when he handed it over. Weiss took the hot potato and glanced at the God of Destruction. People didn't look at him leisurely, and looked at Shampa again. He was indeed looking at him, but that look was about to eat it. Finally, I glanced at Vados, received an encouraging look, and comforted me a bit, then organized a glance at the language, and then proceeded to read the place where Pa had read in an orderly manner. The super dragon will appear to fulfill your wish, but there is only one. No matter what kind of wish, after the wish is fulfilled, all those super Dragon Balls will be redistributed in the 6th and 7th universes. See, I've been waiting for the next wave of people whose wishes have not been fulfilled to come and collect. Of course, the location of the Dragon Ball will be broken up again. In the end, it was written by himself, and Whis read it quite naturally, and Shampa probably also understood the situation of Super Dragon Ball. As this Super Dragon Ball is divine as the legend says. Shampa couldn't help but muttered. Gather the 7 Dragon Balls together and see if it can be realized at that time. The God of Destruction replied leisurely, with Erlang's legs crossed. He ate the fruit that Shampa handed over just now. Shampa scratched his head, and his emotions stabilized. That's right, anyway. he is in the 6th and 7th universes of the two of us, and he can't escape. I saw the god of destruction said lazily, you can't escape if you run, but you won't know if you are taken away. Although he was talking to Shangpa, he did not look at Shangpa. Chapter 254 Beerus Arrangement. Chapter 254 God of Destruction Arrangements. God of Destruction, what do you mean? Shangpa's eyes were full of doubts. Does anyone dare to openly and honestly grab Super Dragon Balls in Universe 6 and Universe 7? Isn't this the public slapping them in the face? But think about it carefully, because Super Dragon Ball can achieve any wish, so there will definitely be a lot of people vying for Dragon Ball, and everyone will be vying for it, and there will inevitably be some mistakes at that time. In case, if one is taken away by others, they will not be able to collect the 7 Dragon Balls, and they will not be able to summon the dragon. Didn't Zhu Nuo say that one is indispensable? The god of destruction is still calm, with an expression that doesn't care about anything. That's what it means literally. Such an attitude angered Shangpa a bit, but god of destruction has always been like this. He doesn't care about anything, and nothing can get into his eyes. Shangpa's big eyes glared at the god of destruction, just about to talk back to the god of destruction. Master Shangpa, don't be angry, it's like this. The god of destruction is under Zunuo's hands and learned that other people can also get Dragon Balls in Zunuo. After all, Dragon Balls are so powerful, everyone thinks, let Shenlong realize himself desire. Weiss picked up the words in a timely manner and smoothed out the situation to ease the atmosphere. Like Pasan, he glanced at the god of destruction and sat down obediently. He thought about it, but he still didn't dare to lose his temper with the god of destruction. Although this guy doesn't like to talk, he has a bad temper and is still so powerful. What can I do? Then what should we do now? Vados asked Shangpa in confusion as he looked at Shangpa's appearance, explaining the embarrassment of Shangpa at the time. Yes, what should I do now, in case the Dragon Balls have been collected by others? Shangpa asked the confusion in his heart. After all, they just remembered to collect Super Dragon Balls. Maybe, those people have already started to collect them, and they may have been preempted. Govern the 6th and 7th universes first, and the idle people will have to register when they arrive. If those people listen to Zuno's words in order to find Super Dragon Balls, they will definitely appear in the 6th and 7th universes at the same time. People are staring to see if they are here for Dragon Ball, and then make plans. Quote. The god of destruction spoke with confidence. It sounded like he had been thinking about it for a long time. It turned out that he didn't care as much as he imagined. Shangpa breathed a deep sigh of relief, secretly glanced at the god of destruction, and then issued an order to Vados. Okay, Vados, go back and notify the people in the 6th universe, and let them strictly monitor the entry of strangers, and what new trends or sneaky people appear in the 6th universe. Shangpa calmly instructed Vados, and Vados, who received the order, immediately set off and returned to the 6th universe. At the same time, the god of destruction nodded at Whis, although he did not explain like Pa and Vados did, but Whis immediately understood the meaning and left, instructing the 7th universe. Seeing the vanishing figures of Vados and Weiss, Shangpa looked at the god of destruction with bright eyes again, and asked carefully, then when will we leave? In Shangpa's heart, the god of destruction is a special existence, so he would subconsciously ask for help in everything, and would also subconsciously obey his orders. Of course, the sooner the better. The faint voice of the god of destruction sounded in the air, after all, in order to avoid long nights and more dreams. Although he still didn't believe that the Super Dragon Ball would be so magical, for the resurrection of his father, he still had to try it if he had any hope. Then let's go now. Shangpa's eyes had a tentative meaning. I am not in a hurry. The god of destruction ate the fruit quietly, and the sun hit the god of destruction. There was a feeling of quiet time, which warmed the time. Shangpa whispered, then you just said the sooner the better. Let's wait until Vados and Weiss come back. After saying this, as if he didn't want to say more, the god of destruction slowly closed his eyes and started to sleep. Seeing that the god of destruction did not speak, Shangpa glanced sideways at the god of destruction, thinking that he was sleeping, so he stopped disturbing him. However, although the god of destruction closed his eyes, he didn't actually sleep. He just didn't want to talk to Shangpa about something that was not nutritious. Shangpa was too noisy. The only thing he worries about is where King Quan is. He promised to help King Quan to find the black ball. Although King Quan didn't come to urge him, if he doesn't give King a black ball, maybe King Quan will come to find him sometime. Trouble. Right now, it just happened to catch up with the Super Dragon Ball. If the Quan Wong came to cause trouble at this time, they would definitely have a particularly big obstacle on their way to find the Super Dragon Ball. And the desire to find Super Dragon Ball is to revive his father. Because his father was dissatisfied with the king's rule at the time and wanted to overthrow the dictatorship of the king, he joined the formation of the ancient Super Sai God. Chapter 255 Ready to Find Dragon Ball. Chapter 255 is Ready to Find Dragon Ball. The fierce battle lasted for so long, which caused King Quan to lose a lot of henchmen. King Quan must be very worried. Although his father was not the mastermind of the rebellious war, his father played a particularly important role in it. The king will definitely remember his father's hatred and hold grudges in his heart. From this point of view, King Quan must have had opinions on his father's resurrection, and even strongly opposed it. He was afraid that when King Quan sent someone to arrest his father, it would cause another war, and the scene would be too chaotic. Ways to clean up the mess. Unless he can dedicate that black ball to King Quan, if King Quan is happy, there may be room for maneuver for his father's resurrection. In the subconscious of the god of destruction, it seems that it has been determined that the Super Dragon Ball can be found, and that the wish with the Super Dragon will be successfully realized. The god of destruction thought about it. Maybe the sun today is too warm, maybe it's too tired, I haven't slept well for a long time, and slowly my consciousness is getting weaker and weaker, and then I soon fall asleep. Who knows, god of destruction, this sleep is a whole day. He slowly opened his eyes, and when he woke up, the sun was already hanging high in the sky, and the god of destruction was covered with a cartoon-patterned blanket, which must have been covered by Weiss, but he couldn't point it out. Pa, that thing. And Weiss happened to come in at this time, and met the god of destruction. With a smile on his face, Weiss walked in with milk and bread in his hands. Master God of Destruction, you're awake, you've slept for too long, let's have some breakfast. The God of Destruction rubbed his sleepy eyes, stretched his body, and yawned. Where's Shangpa? Going back to his own universe. Since he had just woken up, the God of Destruction's voice was a little hoarse. No, Vados came back shortly after you fell asleep, and the two stayed in the 7th universe. They said they would wait for you to wake up and go find Super Dragon Ball together. It really means that Cao arrived, and Shangpa and Vados walked in slowly at the door, but Shangpa's eyes were sleepy, and those two dark circles were impossible to ignore. God of Destruction, you woke up really early. Shangpa's tone was full of jokes. Everyone knew that what he said was ironic. The God of Destruction went to bed yesterday. He thought he was just taking a nap. Who knows that he waited for the God of Destruction for a long time, but the God of Destruction had no intention of waking up at all. Shangpa can only give up. He also wants to hear if Destruction God has any plans for looking for Super Dragon Ball. So he was worried about the Super Dragon Ball thing and couldn't fall asleep overnight, and he couldn't wait to find it. God of Destruction, let's go, can we go? You've slept enough, let's go and look for Super Dragon Ball. Like Pa words, it can be revealed how sad he is about looking for Super Dragon Ball. In a hurry. What's the hurry? If you have enough sleep, you have to be full. Otherwise, how can you find the Dragon Ball? Hurry up and sit down to eat more, and don't waste it. The God of Destruction pointed to the position next to him and motioned for Shangpa to sit down for breakfast. Shangpa sat down on his butt, angrily picked up the bread on the table, and bit it down, as if he had some deep hatred with the bread. There was also a glint of dissatisfaction in his eyes. For the unhurried appearance of the God of Destruction, Shangpa couldn't wait for him, and went to Dragon Ball himself, and couldn't help but get angry with himself. The god of destruction looked at Shangpa, smiled lightly, and then ate breakfast quietly. After the god of destruction had finished drinking the last mouthful of milk, he slowly took out a napkin and wiped his mouth. Shangpa couldn't bear it any longer, and stood up abruptly, pulling the god of destruction to go out. Shangpa urged, "Go, go." The god of destruction turned to one side, and quickly flashed past Shangpa's outstretched hand, and retreated a long way to distance himself from Shangpa. His eyes were full of disgust. "Just after dinner, don't touch me without washing your hands." Without waiting for Shangpa to react, he strode out. "You." Before Shangpa could resist, the figure of the god of destruction disappeared behind him like a gust of wind, leaving him a long distance. Shangpa strode after him, not knowing what to say next to the god of destruction. Two people, one was beaming, the other was silent and irritable. Vados and Shangpa looked at the interaction between the two and smiled at each other. "Let's go too." A smile flashed in Wei's eyes, and Vados nodded with a smile, so he and Vados followed behind Shangpa and the god of destruction. So, god of destruction, Whis, Elephant Paw, and Vados after breakfast set off on the road to find Super Dragon Ball. According to Zuno, the method of collecting Super Dragon Balls is to destroy cosmic stars attached to cosmic dust or planets to confirm whether they are Super Dragon Balls, and the use time interval is 1 year. It is to prove that the Super Dragon Balls must be found within 1 year in order to play the role of Dragon Balls. The god of destruction is in the 7th universe, so we have to start from the 7th universe first, but the sea is so vast, I really don't know where to start. Chapter 256 First Planet. Chapter 256 The First Planet. God of Destruction, your 7th universe is so big, where should we go? That guy Zuno didn't tell you the exact location. Where should we start looking? Facing the azure sky, Shangpa couldn't help but sighed, looking for the Super Dragon Ball. It's really a long way to go. Let's start looking for the planet Quetzal. Although the god of destruction is calm on the face, he has already made plans in his heart. This is the power of the god of destruction. When Shangpa asked, the god of destruction confidently expressed his thoughts. Why, Shangpa is like a curious baby, asking everything. There used to be a lot of human planets in the 7th universe, and I don't know how many, but now due to some reasons, there are only 28 human planets left. We have to start looking for planets with humans first, and choose from these 28. When we finish searching for planets with humans, it will be much easier to find planets with no humans behind. It was the first time that the god of destruction had spoken so patiently. He had to make it clear that if Shangpa couldn't help but act privately, things would be messed up. Why should the first destination be the planet Quetzal? Because I heard that the strength of the Quetzal people is relatively strong, so the god of destruction is thinking, is it because of the role of Dragon Ball, so the first stop is Quetzal planet. The 4 people came to the planet Quetzal and observed the planet, but from the outside, it was impossible to tell whether he was a Dragon Ball. You need to destroy the cosmic stars to know the answer, and the cosmic stars are composed of billions of galaxies, stars, and planets, and they are complex. Seeing this, Shangpa squinted his eyes with a fierce expression, and then quickly gathered the destruction cannons in his hands to destroy the planet. Shangpa, what are you doing? The god of destruction noticed Shangpa's movements and asked. Was named, and his eyes were stunned. Zunuo didn't mean to destroy the stars to confirm that it was Dragon Ball. We can't see anything by staring at him all the time. As he said that, he was about to fire the sabotage cannon, but a strange look flashed in the eyes of the god of destruction, and he stretched out his hand to block Shangpa's hand that was about to move. Don't do it yet, there are people on the planet. God of destruction spoke slowly. But Shangpa was blinded, and his stunned eyes were already stunned. When would the god of destruction care about a planet that could not be beaten by 8 poles? He couldn't help but open his mouth and run against the god of destruction. God of destruction, I said, when are you so kind, and you are still worried about the lives of those people? Shangpa's mouth still had a taunt that he didn't take back. Anyway, if I say no, it won't work. The god of destruction's tone didn't discuss it at all, but he didn't plan to talk to them more. He was here, and Shampa didn't have a chance to do it. In fact, the god of destruction is indeed like what Shampa said, not a kind person. Has he killed fewer people? Of course, he is not a nosy person. What does other people's life and death have to do with him? But why do you want to stop this time? It's not because the people on the planet Keshul are very powerful. If you find the Super Dragon Ball and prepare to make a wish. I still don't know what King Quan thinks about this matter. I can't act rashly. I'm afraid that King Quan does not agree with his father's resurrection and sends troops to block it. When the time comes, Bao Bukchi will fight against King Quan. King Quan's subordinates are a group of brave and invincible people, and there are powerful high priests in charge. They are definitely not opponents. It's better to call some powerful people first. When the war comes, they can resist for a while. They can't be wiped out directly. They can also compete with them later. These people are powerful and they are the best candidates. You can't let the people of planet Keshul die in vain just because you search for Dragon Balls, and you can count on them to play other roles in the future. The god of destruction actually already has a rough plan in his heart, but he still doesn't want to tell Shampa, for fear that Shampa's heartless accidentally leak the rumors, and the fight with King Quan will intensify at that time. Even 100 black balls can't be saved. As for Wes, it was too late. At this time, he had to admire the cautious and mature mind of the god of destruction. This is the person who does great things and has a thoughtful mind. The god of destruction had to make plans for the follow-up. He was not like Shampa. He did whatever he thought of. He said that he would find Dragon Ball to resurrect his father, but he was not prepared at all. Shampa's eyes were full of small flames jumping, and he was very unhappy at this time. But the god of destruction didn't know whether he didn't look at Shampa or didn't care. He ignored Shampa, and instead ordered Weiss behind him. You go and tell the people on the planet Keshul, let them all move out now, find another planet to live for a while, and then let Layla and the old Kaiwang come after we confirm whether this is a Super Dragon Ball or not. Fix the planet and bring them back to live. God of Destruction calmly arranged the task. Chapter 257 Havoc on the planet Keshul. Chapter 257 Havoc on the Kesher planet. Whis, who received the order, arrived at the planet of Kesher, but was stopped by a guard. Although Whis had no hidden traces, the people of Kesher were much more alert than he thought. An ordinary guard unexpectedly discovered his existence so quickly. It seems that he knows the purpose of God of Destruction not to directly destroy the planet. Who are you? Why did you break into the planet Keshul privately? The guard held a weapon with a fierce look. However, Whis smiled with a good temper, and did not care about his rudeness. He asked your ruler Kesher to see me, and his tone was not polite at all. Because God of Destruction once announced that every planet inhabited by people must be named after their ruler. If the ruler is changed, you can log in and change the name. In his memory, the ruler of the planet Keshul is in the bit period is also the longest. The guard looked at the person in front of him with a bit of aura, and he didn't even seem to be afraid of Mr. Kesher. It can be seen that the identity should not be simple. Although he knew that the person in front of him might not be easy to provoke, he still investigated according to the rules. Swallowed. Who are you? Weiss from the 7th universe. Weiss' tone revealed an amiable expression. The guard slowly compared with the figure of the legendary angel Weiss in his mind, and slowly overlapped, suddenly realized, and his tone was also extremely respectful. It turned out to be Lord Weiss, and I'll report to our lord. The guard immediately turned into a jerk. No, it's urgent, let's go together. Weiss stopped the guard. After all, he didn't know that the god of destruction was waiting outside, so it would be better to deal with it sooner. After saying hello to the other guards, I took Whis to see Kesher. However, God of Destruction didn't wait long before he couldn't take it anymore. His eyes had lost patience, and he walked in arrogantly with Shampa and Vados. The guard at the door stopped them as expected. Who is it? The guard held a weapon and faced the three strangers who broke in a neat and uniform manner. It seemed that some of the comers were not good, and he had made a state of defense. The god of destruction is just unhappy. These people dare to hold weapons at him. Their eyes are full of anger, and the destruction cannons in their hands have gathered at an unknown time, rushing towards the guards. The speed was too fast, and the guards could not avoid it at all. Now that they were hit by the destruction artillery of the god of destruction, it was impossible to survive. Looking at the corpse underground, the god of destruction said contemptuously, "It's impolite. Continue to go inside," but the guards of Kesher who heard the movement have already arrived at this time, and surrounded the god of destruction, Shangpa, and Vados. The god of destruction's eyes were even more dissatisfied, and the air pressure on his body suddenly dropped, as if he didn't care about his previous thoughts at all, and he wanted to retain the powerful people, who kept firing sabotage cannons, and a large number of them had already fallen. In fact, this is not the case. God of Destruction knows that Weiss hasn't been out for so long. It must be that old guy, Kesher, who has been refusing to evacuate. At this time, he is just using these shrimp soldiers and crab generals to practice his skills and kill chickens as an example. The commotion was as big as imagined, and the guards had already sent someone to report to Kesher, who was dealing with Wes at this time. "Lord Kesher, 3 people have come to make a fuss about our planet Kesher. Many guards have been injured and killed, and the losses have been heavy," the guards said tremblingly. "What? Do you know who it is?" Kesher stood up from the stool at once. How could he still look calm just now, and their planet has not offended anyone recently? "I don't know, they didn't say it, but 2 of them looked alike, and there was another person who was dressed like Mr. Weiss, a woman." The guards tried their best to recall those who broke in. "Specialty." Weiss listened to the description of the guard and said lightly, "It should be Lord God of Destruction. I must have not gone back for a long time. Lord is a little anxious." In fact, when he heard the guard say 3 people, Weiss guessed it. When Kosher heard that the god of destruction was coming, he knew that he must have offended the god of destruction. Thinking about the god of destruction, his hands trembled in fright, and the teacup splashed on the ground. Hurry up to welcome, just now, Lord Weiss. Suggestion. We will implement it immediately. Move out immediately, and ask Lord Weiss to say good things for us. We have no intention to offend Lord God of Destruction." Kesher turned his hope to Wes, because the god of destruction, is a character no one dares to mess with. He did not directly destroy the planet of Kesher. "What is the guard?" Weiss didn't answer, so he stepped out. Kesher followed closely. The 2 mustaches at the corners of his mouth trembled with anxiety, which was a bit funny. Chapter 258. People with Small Stomachs and Chicken Intestines. Chapter 258. People with Small Stomachs and Chicken Intestines. When Weiss and Kesher went out, they saw the god of destruction sitting on top of the 2 guards, dragging his cheeks and shaking Erlang's legs impatiently. The 2 people under him were already in a coma at this time, and the height of the stack was just right for the god of destruction to sit on it. Seeing this, Kesher's pupils dilated rapidly, his eyes trembled with fear, his face was covered in cold sweat. He hurriedly stepped forward and swallowed nervously. Bye, god of destruction, sir." Kesher looked at the god of destruction with a bit of embarrassment, and was secretly shocked. Shangpa and Vados stood behind them, with an expression that was not too big of a problem to watch a play, quietly eating the melon crowd. The god of destruction opened his eyelids, his eyes tilted, and he looked at Kesher with a terrified face, and only snorted softly. "Lord God of Destruction, I didn't know you were coming. Please forgive me if I didn't come to greet you." Kesher wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, looked at God of Destruction nervously, and glanced at Wes, who was standing behind God of Destruction, hoping that Wei can speak for him. But in the end, he was disappointed, and Weiss looked blank, as if he didn't receive his eyes at all. "Are you Keshuel?" The god of destruction raised his eyes, sat up straight, looked at the little old man with a beard beside him, and looked at him with disgust. Kesher smiled, and the folds on his face could be seen at a glance. Exactly. The threshold for precious land is really high. The god of destruction glared at him with contempt, watching the little old man's attitude a little stiff. Kesher was startled. It seemed that the god of destruction was angry. His eyes rolled a few times, and his heart was like 10,000 grass and mud horses galloping past. This god of destruction is notorious for his temper. How dare, it's my fault, I didn't take good care of my subordinates. He pointed to the attendant under the god of destruction's ass. Huh. I only heard a mocking smile on the mouth of the god of destruction, and then stood up and shouted loudly. I think you deliberately hit me in the face in front of the sixth god of destruction. It was only then that Kesher noticed the face that was very similar to the god of destruction. He was startled and prostrate at the god of destruction's feet with a thud, and he couldn't help clenching his teeth. Don't dare, he kept muttering, hoping to calm the god of destruction. And you, Wes, why did you go for so long? The god of destruction turned his head and looked at Wes, who was standing indifferently behind him, with a displeased expression on his face. Wes looked at the god of destruction pitifully, his eyes full of fog. Lord God of Destruction, people are wronged, they are not as wise and martial as Lord God of Destruction, and they look down on them. Kesher almost spit out a mouthful of blood. This Wes is really talking nonsense without drafting, and I don't know who learned this coquettish skill from. The god of destruction watched the big man wink at him and act cute. He couldn't help but feel a chill. He really wanted to slap him directly and send him to the west. Oh, Keshuel, as the ruler of the planet, are you going to challenge me? The god of destruction was unhurried, watching him word by word, looking down at the person under his feet, showing a playful smile. Shangpa, who had been watching from the side, looked at the god of destruction at this time, but felt that the smile was very strange, and always felt as if someone had suffered again. The god of destruction. Kesher raised his head sharply and looked into the eyes of the god of destruction. The terrifying aura went straight to the bottom of his heart, and he felt extremely regretful. When Wes arrived, he should have thought of it, and he should have gone directly to greet the god of destruction. And watching the god of destruction bend down slightly, the long face in front of him became bigger and bigger. Speaking of which, I heard that you have good skills, and you can make gestures. When the painting style changed, the god of destruction looked at Kesher with a look of interest, as if he was in a much happier mood. He looked at the god of destruction and then at Weiss behind him, caught in a dilemma. God of destruction, you are joking, I am all the work of a three-legged cat. He stood up and lowered his head slightly. It's better than them after all. The god of destruction looked at the 7 or 8 people who fell to the ground with disgust, and glanced at his mouth. Seeing this, Kesher hurriedly waved his hand back, and ordered people to carry these people back first. Master God of Destruction, why don't you go into the hall to speak? Cowell wanted to quickly invite this big Buddha in, serve delicious food and drink, and try his best to make him forget about these things. The God of Destruction didn't know the little juju in his heart. I'm not qualified, these gatekeepers said that idle people can't wait to enter. He waved his hand pretending to be helpless. They are all rubbish with no eyes, they are not worth mentioning, please show mercy. Cowell was in a cold sweat at this time. There are many of his people living on this planet. If this matter arouses the displeasure of the God of Destruction, the consequences he dared not imagine. Do you think I'm a little belly? The God of Destruction didn't plan to let him go easily today, but he will definitely frustrate his spirit. Chapter 259, The Disparity of Power. Chapter 259, The Disparity of Power. Kessel was speechless for a moment, looked at the God of Destruction at a loss, and wanted to say something, but he opened his mouth and swallowed it back, leaving him standing there with a look of embarrassment. Master God of Destruction is the God of Destruction in our entire universe, and he should be a wise God of martial arts. I saw his eyes rolled, revealing a gleam of light, and he simply avoided the topic and boasted about the God of Destruction. There should be no one in this world who does not like to be praised. Keville was playing tricks, smiling and looking at the God of Destruction flatteringly. Bring out all your strength and show me a game, that's all. The god of destruction was a little embarrassed at this time. He usually doesn't make a move. To be able to learn from him is simply a blessing he has cultivated in his previous life. Kesher's heart tightened, his eyes were slightly wrinkled, he squeezed the cold sweat in his hand, and then he raised his head solemnly. Lord God of Destruction, please give me your advice. Kesher took a small step back, clasping his fists at the god of destruction in one fell swoop. The expression on his face became serious and solemn in comparison, and his temperament was more like a planet the ruler should have. The god of destruction nodded in satisfaction, looked back at Wes, and gave him an angry look. Wes, on the other hand, consciously set up a huge barrier around him directly, so that even if the two of them had a large energy aftermath from the fight, they could ensure that the surroundings would not be affected in any way. Ever since the god of destruction accidentally destroyed the sun in a fight. He has a memory, and every time the god of destruction makes a move, he will always hurt the surrounding, and this barrier can just ensure that those troubles will not happen. The god of destruction slowly raised his feet, floated in the air, and looked down at Kesher. Kesher followed, and the two looked at each other while floating in the air. The god of destruction squinted, as if he didn't pay attention to everything in this world. In front of the god of destruction, the big robe behind Kesher was blown by the wind, and it was bulging. Compared to just now, he was really the ruler of a planet at this time. He was full of aura, his eyes were cold and solemn, his brows were full of aura, and he had the demeanor of leading everyone. There was an imperceptible smile on the mouth of the god of destruction. He actually knew this person early in the morning. In the 7th universe, the planet Keshul can become the number one existence, and it has an inseparable relationship with the person in front of him. The name of the planet was also re-decided in the popular election to be named after this powerful and outstanding king. This incident also caused an uproar in the 7th universe at that time, but with the respect and envy of everyone on this planet of Keshul became arrogant. Some people are even complacent because they are from the planet Keshul, even these guards and followers, even more. Many people from other planets have suffered losses in their hands. Several planet leaders even jointly mentioned this time to the Old World King. At that time, the god of destruction didn't care. But today I saw that these people were so rude and angry, but they were very interested in this Kesher. When he came back to his senses, Kesher had already bowed to the god of destruction. Sorry, god of destruction. After he finished speaking, he raised his eyes slightly, stared at him, and rushed over with his fists. The god of destruction closed his eyes and moved at the last moment. The speed was so fast that Kesher clicked his tongue, looking at the god of destruction who looked down on himself above the void, and stayed where he was. Frowning slightly, Bruce shook his head impatiently. It's disappointing, it's too weak. Kevil's heart tightened, the boss's eyes stared instantly, he gritted his teeth fiercely, and directly kicked the god of destruction. The god of destruction turned his head slightly to the side and then directly dodged it. After that, Kevir's hands did not stop. He threw his fists violently and swung hundreds of times a minute, but the god of destruction closed his eyes calmly and didn't need to. Looking at it, he avoided all the attacks without moving his body. After several thousand strokes in a row, Kevir gritted his teeth and watched the god of destruction unscathed, while he himself was gasping for breath. Only then did he deeply understand the gap between them. The god of destruction raised his eyelids, his eyes suddenly sharpened. That's all you can do. After speaking, he directly stretched out his hand and punched him. It was simple and rude. Just as Kesher was about to dodge, the fist had already hit him in the face. Ah! With a low roar, an arc was reflected in front of everyone, and it hit the ground with a bang, leaving a deep pit. The dust hadn't dissipated, and when I saw a figure, I rushed out directly. It was a punch at the god of destruction, and the good discussion turned into a brute force fight. The god of destruction smiled. Instead of dodging, he punched in an emergency. The collision of power and power would inevitably cause fluctuations in the surrounding powerful forces. Fortunately, Wes was well prepared. The god of destruction only used 30% of his strength to directly knock him into the air. After Kesher stood firm on the ground, he was pushed out a few meters away. Chapter 260, Shouldering Too Many Expectations. Chapter 260, Shouldering Too Many Expectations. The god of destruction didn't give him any chance to breathe, so he raised his left hand slightly, kept rapping his fingers, and drew a circle in the air, and a ball of light was directly reflected in the middle. Directly pointing at Kesher's position, the ball of light grew bigger and bigger, and smashed it directly. When he just slowed down and looked up, he saw that the light ball in front of him had finally changed from the size of a fist to the size of a meteorite, and his eyes widened in horror. Before he could come up with a countermeasure, the terrifying power had already attacked. Kesher bit his head, shouted in his mouth, and directly attacked him with his bare hands. Both hands tried their best to resist the ball of light, and the clothes on his body were almost damaged due to the light cannon. At this time, Kesher had a grim face, gritted his teeth, and all the muscle lines in his body were using all his strength to last. Beat. At this moment, the light cannon exploded, and a piercing roar came. Suddenly, sand and rocks flew on the ground, and the surrounding 1 kilometer of land exploded, and the gravel flew everywhere. Weiss tapped the scepter directly and enveloped the three of them. Seeing the surrounding stones flying around, dust filled with dust, and choking disgust, he felt helpless. The god of destruction is so black, so simple and rude. He frowned and looked at the center worriedly. And this explosion also shocked everyone on the planet. This huge force directly shook the star of Keshuel, and also woke up Ruini, who was practicing in retreat. The god of destruction hit this hache in the sky, with a dull expression on his face. He directly stretched out his hand and waved, and the huge force carried the wind directly to drive away the thick smoke. Only then did everyone see clearly that at this time, Kesher was in the deep pit in the middle, and fell to the ground. His upper body and clothes were completely lost, his beard was scorched, his hands were firmly holding the stone under him, his face was turned sideways, and he spat out fiercely. A mouthful of blood. It's still alive, not bad, not bad. Weiss lifted the protective cover, leaned in, looked at Kesher, who was clenching his teeth, and raised his head in front of the attempt, and said twice that it was good. The attack of the god of destruction just now was clear to him. That power, which originally had the power to destroy the sky and destroy the earth, would never cause such a small impact. This guy actually endured more than half of the planet's life. Attack, courage is commendable. You don't have to bear it yourself. The god of destruction turned his hands behind his back and stared at Kesher solemnly, with a hint of solemnity and doubt in his tone. That Kesher directly coughed twice, slowly raised his head, endured the pain that his body was shaking violently, raised his head, raised his eyebrows, and even revealed a smile. It doesn't matter if I die, there are still many people on this planet, please be merciful. The god of destruction suddenly frowned. It was the first time he heard such a request, so he couldn't help but laugh a little. He landed straight on the ground and walked beside him. Can't tell, you still have a virgin heart, he said with a cold smile on his lips, and shook his head in confusion. Kesher's eyes were so swollen that he couldn't open them. One eye was staring at the god of destruction, and his beard was basically burnt. There's no virgin heart, but there are too many expectations. The slightly raised lips and the lonely eyes were all seen by the god of destruction. After speaking, he raised his head, leaving only a wry smile. God of Destruction's pupils trembled slightly, and a different emotion flashed in his eyes. It was the first time that he was influenced by a person's eyes. Those eyes were very similar to his father's last smile in his diary, which contained too much helplessness. Keshuel, you've been trying to convince me to let go of this planet, but you've never mentioned yourself. The god of destruction turned and closed his eyes slightly, not looking at him. Weiss walked over with strides, and looked at Kesher, who was sitting on the ground thoughtfully and couldn't bear it. Lord Destroyer, we still have business to talk about this trip. As he said that, he looked at the destroyer with a smile, and then approached Kesher. With a wave of his scepter, A white light passed directly through the power. The rod lingered around him. Kesher only felt a gentle force lift him up slowly. When he stood firm, the news of the strength hurriedly took 2 steps back, clutching his chest and coughing twice. The god of destruction took a deep breath and tried hard to hide his emotions, but all this could not be concealed from Shampa, who had been watching by the side. 3 days later, I will destroy this planet. God of destruction turned his head slightly, glanced at Kesher, and said word by word. Lord Ruth, you. Cassius was shocked, and his calm state became extremely tense at this time. With only one eye open, he stared at the god of destruction, his mouth he murmured, his face full of disbelief. God of destruction, Keshul has been working hard to develop, never launched a war, and survives peacefully, you can't. Kesher, who do you think you're talking to? The god of destruction cut him off with a sharp shout.